Right, hi, and welcome back to our unit on population ethics. So far in this unit, we've seen a couple of different points of view. We read Harding and Cates, who for different reasons want the government to come in and manage population growth, even if that means restricting people's basic reproductive freedoms. And we also heard from Gita Sen, who views this not really as a problem of environmentalism, but more as a question of feminism and women's rights and the relation between developed and developing nations. So today we're looking at this kind of from a different point of view, that of Thomas Young, who's analyzing more the philosophical ethical question of whether or not it's right to procreate in an overcrowded world. And the conclusion that he came to may have been a little bit disturbing to you, or you may be about to find it a little bit disturbing if you haven't read it yet. But Young has a simple argument. He says, look, most of us find overconsumption to be wrong. We think it's greedy and selfish to take more resources than we need and to damage the environment purely for purposes of self-gratification. But he says, look, reproduction is just as wrong for the same reasons. By reproducing, by bringing children into the world, you're massively increasing the environmental impact that you would have if you didn't have children. And he argues having children largely stems from the same motives that bring people to overconsume or to use resources in a non-sustainable way. So you can read his argument. Of course, he goes into it in a lot more detail than I did there, but you can think about it. If you find his conclusion to be unpalatable, I leave it up to you to point out what's wrong with it. He has a simple mathematical argument, and you may feel like something is amiss there or he's not considering something, but, again, I leave it up to you to show what's wrong with the argument if you don't like it. But again, I'm not going to go too far into Young's argument here because you can read, you should read this paper, and it's also spelled out in the slides in a little more and broken down in a little more detail. But I do want you to think about Young's paper in relation to the material that we've already read in this class. For one thing, if you find yourself agreeing with Young and you think that yes, it is morally condemnable to have children or to procreate in a world that's already crowded and where we're already straining resources, if it's amoral, if it's wrong to increase your environmental impact in that way, you may view that as lending some support to Harding and Cates, who have this somewhat startling view that reproductive freedom should be curtailed to avoid like a tragedy of the commons type situation. If reproduction is morally equivalent to overconsumption, that seems to justify government intervention because governments often intervene in our lives. They put regulations into place to avert environmental disaster, and most of us feel like that's justified. Another thing to think about is to view this through the lens of this dichotomy that Sen was drawing between what she calls the northern and southern world, or between the developing and the developed world. So Young kind of mentions this, I think it's like buried in a footnote, that your average American has 50 to 300 times the environmental impact in their lifetime as somebody from the developing world, especially somebody from Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa. And that is an astounding number when you think about it. That means that a family of 4 Americans has the environmental impact of a village of 1,200 people of a small town of people in West Africa, for example. And usually when we think about population ethics, a lot of the discussion concerns the developing world because that's where rates of growth are the fastest. But when you think about this kind of statistic, that can kind of indicate that maybe we're pointing fingers in the wrong direction here. All right, so these are all issues to think about, and I want you to think deeply about Young's arguments and what he has right or what he has wrong, and we'll talk some more about this on Friday.